Hello and welcome to the Lakeshore Records podcast, On Cue With. I'm your host, Gene Priest, and I am extremely excited about today's episode. I will be joined by the ridiculously talented Ben Lovett. You may know Ben from some of his past work, such as the orchestral tension he so delicately and perfectly added to the horror films The Ritual and I Trapped the Devil, as well as the synth-heavy sci-fi vibes he brought in 2015's Synchronicity. Today I caught up with Ben to discuss his latest work, The Wolf of Snow Hollow, in theaters Friday, October 9th. And now, on to the conversation.
To walk with me and be safe.
Ben, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you've been doing well and hopefully keeping your creativity in these really kind of odd times we've been living in lately, right?
Yeah, I've been doing well, the 2020 version of that, whatever that means.
It's just it's a whole readjustment. Like, okay, cool. So like I've lived my entire life up to, okay, now I start over and relearn how to do everything. It's been interesting. And I'm sure that working on a new feature film was absolutely no different to kind of, just give you some extra things to do, right? And figure out.
Yeah, I've been really fortunate. So, The Wolf of Snow Hollow we did in late 2019, and it's just, the movie's been finished, but it's just sort of been in COVID jail all year.
Yeah.
But I had signed on to a bunch of other projects early in the year, like in January, right after Sundance. So I have oddly stayed slammed busy through this whole thing, but all on projects that were already shot last year.
Oh, that's all. Yeah, that's true. That's the production world, you stay ahead of it.
Yes, and so I don't know what the next 9 months are going to look like. I could be staring at a desert, but the last 9 months or so have been oddly busy for me, which has given me I feel very, very fortunate considering what a lot of people are going through. But it's giving me my own strange, unique version of something that is already strange and unique,
right?
In terms of just the situation of this year.
I know. It's kind of that thing, man. You just kind of adapt and roll with the punches, and then maybe when all this is over, you're going to take a little vacation out to, who knows, Joshua Tree, just somewhere crazy and remote, just so you can kind of like reset what life is. Like, okay, I have to remember what things were like before. It's gotten really weird, but if you don't mind, just to kind of like start this off, like, do you mind to set up, just for any listeners that haven't maybe seen the trailer, give a little setup just about the film, The Wolf of Snow Hollow in general. It was written and directed by Jim Cummings, correct?
It is. Jim is the star of the movie as well. He's kind of a creative force of nature. This is his second feature film. Jim's first film, Thunder Road, won the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance as a short, and then they crowdfunded money to turn the short into a feature, and then he debuted that at South by Southwest, and they won the Grand Jury Narrative Prize for Features there. And so this film, and that film is exceptional. And
he's also been producing for a long time, right? I
remember
seeing that he produced the film Krisha, and I remember that movie being just fantastic. And when I saw, I was like, okay, well, if he produced that, now, he's going to keep in line with that same sort of like, really twisted darkness. But like, I think that this, again, the trailer alone for me was like, oh, this is going to be good. This is going to be fun.
Well, Jim has a very, very unique style and a very unique blend of sort of drama and comedy. And for people who have seen Thunder Road, they'll kind of know what I'm talking about. I think it's something you get it or you don't.
Right.
It's kind of like he finds a way to tap into a sort of absurdity and a dark humor in just how awful life can be. But I mean that in the best way, in a way that I absolutely can. I really the word is more like it's how bittersweet life can be, really is what it is. It's like all the sweet is bittersweet. And what
is the sweet without the bitter? What's the good without the bad? Like, you have to have.
He just taps into something that's distinctly his own. And when I got contacted about this film, it was the producers. Jim works a lot with a group called Vanishing Angle, and they're a production company in LA, and who did Krisha and had done a lot of other things that Jim was working on previous to Thunder Road. And they have a collective of really inspired and talented people out there. And I had worked with the producers on a film about 4 or 5 years ago called American Folk, and they gave me a ring. And have you seen it? Okay, great, yeah. And that was a really rewarding experience. I really liked their camp and what they were all about. And so they gave a call and they said, we have this werewolf movie. What's your schedule like?
Done.
And I said, yeah. I was like,
you had me at werewolf.
About this werewolf movie. And they said, well, it's this guy Jim Cummings, And I had heard about Thunder Road, but I had not slowed down enough to see it. And they said, well, watch it because you should sort of know what you're getting into. And I think I stopped the movie after about 10 minutes and picked up my phone and called him. And I was like,
wow.
Whatever you got, I'm in. I don't need to read the script or know that. Just count me in. Whatever this guy's doing next, I want in.
Oh my God. So that's kind of like how you got involved into this project then, because you got the opportunity to see it and literally just scooped it right up. Like, I have to be a part of this.
Well, I had not even seen this. I just watched his first film and was just like,
man, I just
like
the
watched
style.
Thunder Road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man.
I could just tell like that he had a thing and was doing something and coming from a certain perspective that I immediately just felt like I got it and I really liked it. And and I mean, the reality is I probably made up my mind, but I probably got to the end of the movie and then called and was like, really, I'd love to be a part of whatever a werewolf movie version of this is.
Exactly.
You can count me in.
And, again, I can't overstate it enough. Werewolf movies are never a bad thing. I mean, it's always a plus. With that being such, talking about werewolves, that's a very iconic thing to do, within the horror genre or any genre, really. So for you, coming into this project, knowing what you knew, what was the inspiration that you had to like pull from, and kind of where did you even start when you knew what the script was and you knew kind of what theme and direction you wanted to take it?
I think my starting point was you could tell right away that it's a big problem in a small town. And you've got these guys who are kind of out of their depth, these sheriff's deputies trying to solve this series of murders that are happening on the full moon. And, we're kind of with our one guy who's keeping a lot of plates spinning in his own personal life and just trying to convince everyone around him that there's no such thing as werewolves. And, so I don't know, it felt like, because it's not like a big, slick, big budget Hollywood looking movie. It still kind of feels like an indie film in a way. But in the best way. I mean, it's just like, it feels like a nice, like very contained, very practically driven film. This isn't some big CGI monster movie. It's like it feels like an indie dark comedy.
I was about to say, so like I haven't seen the film, but I have seen the trailer, and one thing that jumped out to me was I love the overall look. And again, I'm a video editor, so like I a lot of times go to like color correction and what mood was someone setting, and just seeing the trailer and the way that the coloring and just the palette that was used, it has this really like soft look that almost gives me a feeling. I want to immediately go in my mind to like 80s horror, I ought, even though it's modernized, but the feel that I get just automatically says, okay, this is going to be one of those movies that, yes, it's going to be scary, but it's going to be most important fun. And
I sort of started taking stock of all the things that were on deck, right? Which was that look and that visual palette and the aesthetic, the fact that it's Orion Pictures,
right?
And what we grew up watching with all these great Orion Pictures films, and they did everything from RoboCop to the first Terminator. And
I know.
Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. And
when I saw the Orion logo, I was like,
oh,
this feels I already felt nostalgic before the trailer started just by seeing that Orion. That's such a good point. Like that's insane.
And then you add in Robert Forster, and you've got like this guy who's a cinema noir legend, and famous. He has Academy Award nominee for his performance of Jackie Brown, and there was taking stock of all the things all the cards that were in the deck. It felt like there was an opportunity to lean into something a little bit more old school, not retro, but even further back. Like there was more of a feeling that I could maybe get into some classic Hollywood mystery noir stuff.
That was the first
and that
thing I
led
thought
me,
of when I heard this.
Yeah, it just feels that way.
It does, man. I see a detective or someone sneaking around almost in every track. You know, I can in my head see this guy just tiptoeing. And
oh, that's right, because you've listened to the score, but you haven't seen the movie, right?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
So I have no context to any of these scenes. So like,
that's amazing.
I've got a great question for you, and I'll give you that in a little while. But yes, it does. It has a throwback feel.
Yeah. Yeah. There wasn't like an effort to be retro or kind of anything about it. It was really just like where to draw inspiration from for what could give the score and give the movie like a personality, like a sonic sort of fingerprint that felt distinct. And instead of just kind of, I don't know, I feel like there was a way that the score could kind of help speak to the intentionality of like the way the movie, the perspective of it, and there's a sort of self-awareness of itself as a, like it's not like a breaking the fourth wall kind of thing. There's just like a sense about it that's aware of all the other classic monster movie.
The humor kind of lends to the
before.
absurdity.
Yeah.
Like you get it.
Yeah. And when I started looking back at, for inspiration from that era, that like Bernard Herrmann era of classic mystery noir stuff, there was a sense of where the music could be at once very big and yet also speak to the sort of comedy and the absurdity of it at the same time. So it could service your action beats and your scary scenes, but with a bit of a wink and a bit of a little elbow to it, you know?
I can already tell, just by seeing, just some of the imagery. I mean, this is one of those films that I think that is going to be talked about, in the future. It'll be one of those genre films, right? That like has such a style that, from the trailer alone, I can see that in, the way that they creatively took that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you're right. I certainly got that feeling just from the camp of people who were making this movie. It's not assembly line production filmmaking. It's a community, like a group of artists, a group of people who like working together, who sort of, came together and with a wild idea and a little bit of, a couple sticks to rub together and make a fire with. And that's always... the challenge of that can be very rewarding, but there was content there. There was for me, it's like werewolves are cool, but like what's the story? Like where's the part of it where I can relate to something? Where's the humanity that I can get into? That I can because I need to know where to come from.
Yep.
I don't really think I'm good enough at this job to just sort of be able to like flip the right assembly of switches and kind of calibrate to perfect werewolf.
Perfect werewolf movie. You don't have a preset for this? You don't like?
I don't have a preset for that. And so I just kind of have to be able to. I got to get it. I got to feel like there's something in there that speaks to something in me, and this had that, and it gave me a way in.
That's amazing. And so, the inspiration aside, like you've been very well versed in making scores that are very heavily orchestral, and that's something that I've loved about the stuff you've done in the past. For example, The Ritual blew me away, man. That score is beautiful, and
it just about killed me making that one.
Really?
It was an intense experience.
I'll bet. I mean, the music I was about to say has an intensity that like you have the ability to use something so minimal and add not only a tension, but a beauty at the same time. And I think that that's a hard thing to find, maybe in a score in general, but especially in my opinion, when you're working with like strings, they definitely lend to emotion, but to be able to use something on the edge that can give you both feelings at once of anxiety as well as like this immersion into this world, like that's a hard thing to do. And as a composer, I want to know kind of how you get your headspace into, without having, I'm sure there are definitely not, who knows, maybe you play every single orchestral instrument and I just am not aware of that, but how do you get into writing an album like this from the start, just as a producer standpoint?
Well, I certainly do not play every orchestral instrument. I'll go ahead and dispel that myth right now.
Okay.
I don't play any of them, and so writing for them has been, an adventure.
Yeah.
Over the years, I've just been. Well, I think I'm very sound driven, and I think that I know some people sit down and they start with a melody or they start with a melodic progression, and I think that I think I'm starting by, I start to create sounds or look for sounds that start to feel like they describe the atmosphere of the film, whether that's emotionally or visually or whatever I might be responding to of whatever thing you can't put your finger on, but you're like, this feels like the movie.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I think that it's a process of trying to find certain techniques or certain sounds that certain instruments make that then lead you to, well, what could I write for that thing to do?
A whole new idea around maybe a, just a bow and a string making just a creaking noise that can lead to an entire, cue in itself.
Yeah. I mean, I've always said in the past, I'm a self-taught sort of I came at this from more of a punk rock background of just sort of well, what would happen if you plugged that thing into that thing and then put that on top of that and then stick that thing in the microwave?
Yeah.
So it's much more exploratory in the sense that it's not coming from it's not an academic exercise for me. It's more of an experiential process of trying to come up with things that just sort of see what I can create by chasing a lead or an inspiration from a sound, or sometimes it is a melody. Sometimes you sit at the piano and you're like, oh, that feels like
exactly
this character or this aspect of the story that feels like it really describes that. And then you go about, moving that on to different instruments that you have in the palette. But I think as
do you find yourself writing on a piano?
Yeah, I do. And I learned to play guitar before piano, but it's funny that and sometimes their guitar does make it into my scores, but it really does feel like because I write songs and produce bands and things, the guitar seems to be more of a gateway into songs, and the piano seems to be more of a gateway into scores for me.
Oh man, see, that's a great way to put it. And I did want to say about the production stuff, that Heavens record with Matt Skiba. Let me just tell you how big of an Alkaline Trio fan that I was. I mean, I grew up in that, that era, right? So I grew up in playing in emo bands, and I don't want to say emo, playing in, that sort of scene and growing up around those guys. And I remember when he released that Heavens album, I was knocked back by the production on it.
Oh, that's awesome.
I wasn't expecting that,
Yeah, I mean, that was me, Skiba, and Joe, at my house, in LA
so
back then, just making this thing over the course of a summer for fun. I mean, really, it was we just did that as a side project. That was never really supposed to even turn into a band that toured around, Europe and the States, and all of that kind of happened as a result of it just sort of turned out cool. And people really liked it, and Epitaph put it out, and they got behind it, and then, I think that obviously Skiba having a fan base from the trio is kind of already in place. I mean, the craziest thing about that whole Heavens thing to me in my mind was, we had to sort of assemble a band of friends to go out and play the songs because it was this studio project.
Exactly.
And so the first show the band ever played was this sold out club in Manchester, England, with people screaming their heads off and just psyched out of their mind. And we're walking out to play our first show.
And that's not surreal or anything, right? That
it was ridiculous.
Another day.
It was the most fun you can imagine. Yeah.
Oh my God.
It was a fun ride with that.
That is, I can't even imagine being thrust sort of into that. You get together with your friends and you guys have an idea to make this really moody, kind of throwback album. Gave me lots of Joy Division vibes, which I always appreciate. And next thing you know, oh, look at this. We're in Manchester and there's a lot of people here
touring
to see
around touring around the UK, and we've played 2 shows.
And that right there, my friend, is where the internet came into play. That, like, I remember growing up, they were like, tour. You have to be on the road. Not in these days, man. It's again,
certainly not now.
Yeah, no,
That's
definitely
all changed.
But it's for the better, I think, because I feel like, for myself, and you may feel the same. There's something comfortable about knowing that, like, when you're working on a project like this, sure, there are times where you need to get together with other people and collaborate and do that. But a lot of times you get that alone time that you need to put into the project. And sometimes the alone time is what you need when you're writing. It's very important.
Yeah, but it's also, I spend so much time alone, and this is such a solitary occupation at times, this film scoring part of it, that part of, just to circle it back to an earlier question, part of why I end up employing a lot of live instrumentation on the scores I do is because I just like being in the studio with musicians. I just like to get together in the room with people who play instruments way better than me.
Oh man,
to take my little ideas and kick them around the room with these people and make them sound a lot better than I ever would have been able to on my own.
I mean, how rad is that, right? Like, so, like, it's cool to think of coming from like a punk rock background or any other sort of rock, jazz, anything that's not orchestral, to know that you could still sit in a room with these musicians that are infinitely talented. I mean, I love orchestral music so much, and that's kind of one of the reasons is the skill and precision that you hear. Like, it's just everything. I don't even know. I think I would almost be more intimidated to tell them, hey guys, this is my idea. Like, I want you, violin guy, I want you to do, this, or, cello. This would sound great if you just did a slow sweep. I would be afraid they'd look at me like, yeah, you're a drummer for sure. I can tell.
Well, look, I can't even overstate how much, like, you mentioned The Ritual. I mean, that was the London Contemporary Orchestra. That's Johnny Greenwood's group.
God,
that's the Tom York's group. Like, they do like live film screening performances.
I just got heart palpitations for you as you said Johnny Greenwood and Tom York. Yeah,
that the bar hurts. Is so high for these guys, and they work on the most cutting edge stuff. So, like, if you to like pitch them some ideas of, like, it can be like, as any self-taught musician around a bunch of really accomplished, well-studied classical players, you can't help but carry some bit of insecurity into that situation. But, like, if you let that get the better of you, then, you're going to screw up the whole thing. And so, like, for me, I guess my way around that is, like, I'm not in there. I'm no composer. I'm barely a musician. I'm a storyteller.
Oh, wow.
And my job, I just do it in a lot of different ways and disciplines. And I just use music primarily as the means to collaborate with people to help tell their stories. And so I've learned a lot about how to communicate to those people.
Yeah.
But it's if there's a talent anywhere, it's just in maybe having learned over the years how to communicate what I'm trying to accomplish or get to people who are much more adept at achieving that than me.
Yeah.
And so if you're listening to this and you're thinking that, like, you want to do this, but you don't have, like, a background in music theory, or what, throw that shit out the window.
Yeah.
Like, that's not the thing standing in your way or preventing you.
Dude, I love hearing that.
But you will have to face that down, and you'll have to get through, this fear that, like, well, what if they all realize I don't know what I'm doing? Just embrace that. Just know what you want and what you're trying to get to. There are other people who can help you figure out how to get there.
I've been there. I've had that imposter syndrome feeling before, like, I'm doing what I want to be doing, but am I doing it as good as other people do that I look up to? And then I start, like, looking in on myself, like, am I out of my depth
kiss of
here?
Death right there. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
I'm starting to slowly learn, you can't overthink things because that's the trap in itself.
There's like a Picasso quote that's something like the chief enemy of creativity is good sense or something like that.
Yeah.
And there's something related to that with this. It's like the quickest way to kill your own ambition is to, like, admit to all the things you don't know, or I don't know what it would be, but you get the idea.
Absolutely.
It's like, you kind of just have to have the confidence that as long as you figure out what it is you're trying to say or what it is you're trying to get to, figuring out the means of how to get there, there's a lot of different roads to take.
Absolutely.
And it's not about the quality of the musicianship on it or the musicality of it being groundbreaking. It's just, does it tell the story?
Exactly.
Does it make it a better movie? Does it help clarify the intention of the characters?
And see, the great thing is once you've made an established record like, you obviously have, a director can come to you and they already know that when they enlist you for the soundtrack, they know what kind of vision you're going to bring to it. And that's the cool thing too about being a composer, is that you can kind of show your own range of how you portray things, because it's all subjective. Every composer would write a different score. And
that's right. And that's because we deal in the aspect of the storytelling that you can't, that's maybe the most subjective part of it, right?
Yes, absolutely.
If the scene takes place in a dark hallway, there's only so many versions of dark hallway you're going to be able to light in film,
exactly,
right? Or whatever. If the character is a girl in her 20s, there's only so many. I just mean that there's a parallel part of telling any story that only music describes best.
I agree with that completely.
You can't write it as dialogue. Yeah. You can't shoot it and frame it. It's just something that is told by and understood best by describing it musically. That just as human creatures, we all have that in common.
Oh yeah.
And so you're a collaborating agent of the story when you come on board.
That's kind of the coolest thing too, is your music has very much a sound, and this was something I wanted to get to because I wanted to play my favorite cue from.
I can't wait to know what it is.
Yeah, I know. See, it brings me back to how much Hitchcock I heard in this from the very beginning. And then when I heard this track, it was all over. I was like, that's it. This is so good. I'm getting chills because I can envision a scene that I haven't even seen yet, but I know what actions are taking place. And the track is Third Crime Scene. It has such a fun, this song is a very, when talk about classics, this is as Hitchcock tension and fun as you can possibly get.
It's so cool to hear you describe the cue and the movie in your mind from it, because I think it's great that these things have an opportunity to live on and can sort of take on these other depictions of, because it does describe very specifically a moment in the film, but it also, once it's on the soundtrack, it's just like the soundtrack is a condensed version of just the spirit of the film and the idea of what happens in the movie. And when you play it, you get to sort of retell it to yourself. Anyway,
yeah, exactly.
I like that about soundtracks. And so, Third Crime Scene is, you should probably notice from the titles, you have first crime scene, you have second crime scene, you have third crime scene. So by the time we're at the third crime scene, the wheels are coming off the bus, with this guy. And
this is when he's trying to convince everyone, no, for real, there is a werewolf, and they're saying, it's a person. It's a person.
There's just a manic energy to the movie at times, and there's a few stretches, and this is one of them, where there is a real cool synchronicity between the the edits and the cutting, the cross-cutting between scenes of the movie and getting to score.
Oh, I can see montages happening on this. Yeah. Fast cuts. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You can sort of even feel it a little bit, how it's the kind of thing that is really specifically done to picture.
Exactly.
Because
the film is cut to this track.
Yeah.
I love that.
Well, it's actually the other way around.
Or did you score to the film?
I scored it to, yeah. So in the situation like this, I scored this to the way they had cut it to sort of give it like a sort of energy that would thread all these different
That's why it feels so together. Usually you can lock into like kind of a groove even in soundtracks, because again, a lot of them are written the other way around where it's to something, so they cut it almost to like a beat. But this has this like manic, and it's so fun because the song just changes out of nowhere, and whoa, what's that? Like it hits you in so many different ways.
It's a lot of sharp pivots, and it turns a lot of quick corners, and a lot of that is just me responding to how they cut it.
And this isn't a minute and 39 seconds.
It's probably one I should have extended longer or something, but that's kind of where you wind up sometimes when you're responding to what's on the screen. It's like that isn't a longer piece cut down. That's me specifically addressing what's on screen.
And see, that's something that's really fun to know too, because a lot of people do sort of have that misconception sometimes when they're looking at film cues and they say, okay, so this was a minute and 36 seconds. So this was the piece of music that was in the film, but not the whole song. And it's like, no.
Yeah. It's not always like that.
Right.
Yeah.
The cue is what is, that is the sound bed, that was created specifically for that. And I can totally see that now that you've said that. I can absolutely hear how you had so much fun cutting that back to the footage. I couldn't imagine writing that way. That's a struggle.
That track definitely has the spirit of the film in its bones.
Oh yeah. I could tell that instantly. I mean, but also another track that we cannot, leave out talking about is Little Red Riding Hood. Tell us a little bit about that, man. It is gorgeous.
Thank you. So that was an idea that kind of came up while I was still in the scoring process, but as happens oftentimes on film projects, they end up starting to assemble, sales assets, and they start cutting a trailer, and they start doing all these other things in other parts of the production while you're scoring, because they've kind of finished everything else, and now it's in music camp, and they start doing all these other things. So they started working on a trailer, and there was this idea to use the 1966 Sam the Sham recording of Little Red Riding Hood, which is the famous version that everybody knows. And I was kind of like, you guys are never going to be able to afford to get this song.
Right.
And I just sort of
anticipated before. I don't know.
And I was like, they might, but I had an instinct that just a song, an old iconic 60s tune like that is usually pretty tough to get and
Absolutely.
Pretty pricey. And so I kind of said, well,
I'm a
because I've done this. I've done this in the past on other films, and kind of said, well, we could do our own version, and then you only need to get the rights to the publishing, and we'll do a cover of it, and we'll do it tailored just for this film. And so everybody really liked that idea, and the fact that I have all these songs I've produced, to kind of show.
They knew,
they were like, okay. It wasn't like, let me try this. It was kind of like, I have other ones I could say, like, look, we'll do it like this.
Exactly.
But whatever you want it to be. And it was Jim's idea, I think, to say, what if it's a female singing the song?
Oh, man,
and that's a song that, the best way to put it is like, there's a campiness, like a 60s sort of campiness to the original recording of that song that almost sort of obscures how strong the lyrics are,
right?
Until you
hear it
lift the hood on that
a little bit,
It's just when you look at the lyrics, you're just like, there's a lot here that can be interpreted and delivered in a totally different way and give you a whole different idea. And there was something about the idea of a female voice singing this song about the danger of sort of walking home alone at night. There was just like, it took on something very sinister and very dangerous to me.
I mean, it's beautiful.
I started thinking, like, who did I know that was a vocalist that could embody and deliver that? And I had worked with Valentina on a song years back that we wrote together, and immediately her voice is just a force of nature, and she has such amazing control of her singing ability that I was like, hey, what do you think about this? And we really just more talked about the idea of it, and then she kicked a demo back to me that, I mean, it's basically the song. I mean, I just sort of, she interpreted that whole thesis so well that it was just me designing a soundscape around it.
Was it yours or her idea to do the extremely rad, like spaghetti Western style guitar? Because between that contrast and her voice, that's what just nails that feel.
Yeah. I would say it's probably somewhere in the middle, because I think even in her original demo, she had like a little sort of just MIDI sound doing that little boom, down, down. And, you know, it was like a little, and it was just to kind of indicate like, you know, maybe some kind of element like this is doing that. And then it was like, oh, well, what if we go get a baritone? You know, I got a guy who's great on baritone guitar, and he's a Nashville guy, plays a lot of country music. You know, I bet he could dial that sound in great.
Oh,
and so it was like, hey, give me some options for like, you know, the Sergio Leone version of like this little 3-note lick. And then let's kind of see where that takes us. And then it grew outward from there. And then we got into all the spooky slide guitar stuff, and, you know.
And all
my string arrangement on that song is ostensibly just an extension of her background vocals. I mean, Valentina's background vocals were part of her original idea and demo. And
you mean at the beginning, those little like trills and sort of like rises?
All that oohs and ahs.
Yeah.
Well, it's really all of the sort of floating chordal changes that are going on in the chorus and things. It's just like a orchestrated version that grew out of the seed that she planted with those vocals.
Oh man, that's absolutely beautiful. That's definitely another standout track from this record, which again, there's a lot of them. Here's a question, because again, as a musician myself, I always like to ask everyone this. If you had to narrow it down, and we can even draw it into scope and say, on this album, if you had to narrow it down to one piece of gear or instrument that you relied on and used the most personally in the creation of this, what would that be?
This is probably not a fun answer to that, but it's honestly the most honest thing I say.
All I want is honesty. That's it.
It's the people who collaborated with me on this were the most indispensable part of it, because I had people helping me orchestrate the parts and put them on charts properly, so that I wasn't writing a note that the bassoon can't play.
Right.
You know, which is real easy to do, and I've learned the hard way by being, you know, what I mentioned about this kind of self-taught learning on the job aspect of my career is you end up writing a part for a violin or a flute, and they're like, I don't have a note that low, you know, and you spend time in the session burning time and money trying to fix that. So whether it's people doing that, people expanding on an idea or a melody and going, you know, here's the idea for the thing, you know, as you're orchestrating, like, what would the clarinets do? I didn't write anything, but they're going to be here. So like, can you write, like, where would the voice for the clarinet be best?
Oh man.
Down to the players in the room, because this was a situation where there really wasn't a budget that would have suggested any real live instrumentation, much less the entire thing. But the idea, kind of linking it all the way back to what we were first talking about, the idea of trying to pack like big ideas into small packages kind of led me to this idea of, well, what would going into that Bernard Herrmann, Hitchcock era sound, but with a small ensemble of players? And what's the budget version of that sound like? Like, what's the version that isn't trying to be those things, but is clearly inspired by them? And
see, that is the coolest answer that you could give, though, because when it comes down to this, like, you know, what's the most important thing for you to have gotten through this record, and for you to say, you know, the musicians, like, that's one of the things that I don't even think about. You know, I wouldn't have thought that. I would have thought, you know, maybe, you know, again, I think in terms of effects and things like that, but that's literally the best way to look at it, because you're giving your vision, but also allowing them to lend their vision to, you know, what you're giving them to work from.
Well, and the nature of me in a recording session with live players, even when it's orchestral players with sheet music in front of them, is still me running into the room every couple of takes, waving my arms around like, oh, okay. So same thing, cut off the front and then like the end, like let's do that twice as long. And then you guys drop out right here and everybody's marking their pages. So it's still like, I'm still writing it and adapting and changing it even as we're making it, just because it's not just that the instruments are there to express the ideas on the page and it's that black and white. It's each little part is there to get us to the next phase of it.
Right.
And then each part of that instructs me in a different way. So a thing you wrote sitting in your studio on your MIDI keyboard comes across at you totally different once you're sitting across from 8 or 9 string players playing it back to you. And then you're like, oh, why did I write all 3 basses playing that? You know, you should be up an octave and like violas, you guys should double that instead of doubling the violins. I don't know why. Just because you're sometimes writing and responding to the way these plugins and stuff sound.
Exactly.
And then you get in the room and it sounds different. And so to be able to adapt on the fly and to have them be very patient and very understanding and not make me not activate my own insecurity about like, what is this guy doing? You know, like there's nothing on this sheet but a bunch of whole notes. Like he wants to kick footballs all the way through the session.
Right.
And so to have players that are willing to be like flexible, and because for a lot of orchestral players, you have to understand, like they don't necessarily always enjoy kind of having to work off the page, because what they've learned how to do is practice and rehearse and learn a piece of music and execute it flawlessly.
Right.
So all of a sudden you're pulling the rug out from under them or making them stand on one leg and do it. And it's kind of like that's putting them out of their comfort zone.
Exactly.
And so when you have players who can meet you in the middle of that and they're down for a little bit of a wild exploratory punk rock recording session, then I think maybe that's a path to getting to something that has some sort of unique character or flavor.
Absolutely. And I think that lends to its own special voice, because instead of just kind of like distilling the idea through one person, you're now going through an entire orchestra of people who are classically trained to be musicians, and that's what they do, to put their spin on an already good idea. And that's like, I mean, that must be such a feeling though, to do that. I mean, I can't imagine working in that capacity. I really couldn't.
Well, and sometimes they have this ability to make an okay idea a good idea.
Right.
They can make a good idea sound better.
Yep.
But sometimes they can even make an idea that's okay sound pretty good.
Exactly. But you build from that, you know, and
Sure.
kind of like you become a team as you're doing, you know, I would imagine. How long did it take to record the score?
Well, so the nature of how we had to do this was the only option available to me was to use a smaller group of players and sort of stack them and kind of have people cover multiple parts, which is it's very time consuming to do it that way. And sometimes you're just like trying to find what's the trade-off between, you know, it gets down to very boring like logistic stuff, but it's part of the job. Like it absolutely influences your creative decisions when you have very specific time and budget limitations.
Exactly. So you're saying instead of recording the entire orchestra as you would hear it at once, you're kind of doing standard, like, you know, rock music, you know, multi-track recording with, you know, segments at a time.
Right.
Wow.
And part of that was to give me, as part of it, that the recording of the players for me, be they orchestral players or a drummer or a percussionist or whatever, that's never for me necessarily the last stage of the process.
Right.
It is fundamentally for some composers, you know. But for me, I need to take what we recorded and then go fuck with it. You know?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. I got to kind of take it and then, because again, even that part is just another step towards trying to get in the end to something that's serving the movie best.
So once they've recorded, you still need to put your mixing and you know, EQing and your sound on their sound. I get that completely.
Because where I might lack in my years of you know, conservatory study and sort of learning, where I don't have necessarily like a deep history on the musical side of it.
Right.
I have a studio production. All those years were spent making records and learning how compressors work, and like, you know, so it was sort of like that's part of the process for me, is usually because, like I said, I kind of always am gravitating back towards like a sound that makes you feel a certain way. and it's not all about the sound and it's not all about the music. It's somewhere where those things meet and how that creates a feeling.
Man, that is beautifully said. Ben, thank you so much for your time, and
my pleasure.
I very much look forward to seeing this film, and I will definitely be speaking with you soon.
All right, cheers, James.
Thank you.
Bye.
Once again, thank you so much for listening. That was such a fantastic conversation with Ben, and I honestly cannot wait to see this film. Don't forget, you can grab the soundtrack for yourself on October 9th via Lakeshore Records. Until next time, be safe and be excellent to each other.